In December of 2024, a strange fog descended over Los Angeles, but this wasn't ordinary fog. It had a chemical smell like fireworks and left behind a strange purple residue. So when reports of identical phenomena began pouring in from around the world, people knew something wasn't right. Humans and animals began showing mysterious symptoms, and the truth became clear. This was something far more sinister than weather. So now, the question wasn't just what this fog was, but who or what was behind it and why it was happening. The mystery would prove to be more terrifying than anyone expected. You won't want to miss this one. On the afternoon of December 5th, 2024, a 34-year-old contractor named Theo drove home through the outskirts of Los Angeles, thinking about an overdue electric bill and half listening to a talk radio station. As he rounded a corner, he spotted a thick blanket of fog settling over the distant skyline. Initially, it looked like any other low-hanging cloud, and so when he rolled down the window, that's when he caught a chemical smell. It actually reminded him of gunpowder. Due to Los Angeles being the way it is, he just figured it was just pollution and kept going. Now, in the following days, with everybody getting caught up for Christmas shopping, he just didn't give it too much thought. But on one particular trip to the hardware store, he heard a couple of customers complaining about how this morning haze just kept leaving this funky residue on their windshields that they couldn't get off no matter how hard they scrubbed. And a neighbor even mentioned waking up to that same acrid scent drifting through open windows right before the sun rose. But again, Los Angeles is known for a smog, so whatever, you know? During this time, Theo caught himself glancing up at the sky more often than usual, half expecting the haze to thicken or even reveal something more, but he always just saw that same flat, colorless fog line hovering near the horizon and just brushed it aside. Whatever it was in the air just felt like a weird side note that he could worry about later. Interestingly, one afternoon before Christmas, Theo was on social media and he noticed a significant uptick in chatter about this same dense haze.
I know that looks like rain, but that is not rain.
This fog is not going away. I have a migraine from hell today. This morning, I was so sick to my stomach when I went home from work. Is this related to the fog?
Does anybody else just feel like they should be walking around wearing a gas mask? Like, what is happening in the UK at the minute with the weather?
But the weirdest part is the taste and smell. It smells like after you set off a bunch of fireworks.
You had random people on X, some from Tampa Bay, others from areas in the UK, were posting nearly identical descriptions of this strange, pungent, sulfuric smelling odor. A couple of photos showed faint purple smears on sidewalks and car hoods, not quite soot and not quite dust. Again, he didn't think too much of this, even though it was getting stranger, but the more he kept reading, the more everything pointed to something sinister. In fact, later on that night, after dinner, Theo jumped on X again and saw a post from a man in Orange County describing how his outdoor lights flickered whenever a thicker patch of this fog came through the area. A user from San Bernardino claimed the local wildlife seemed off. Night birds calling at odd hours, dogs whining and pawing at doors. Something strange was happening, but nobody sounded panicked yet. Well, not too long after, Theo, who lived with a roommate at the time, barged into the kitchen rattling off rumors from a coworker who spent the holidays up in New England. Now, supposedly, the coworker had also noticed discolored, sticky snow and a sour, tangy smell in the air, even through a closed car window. Theo, of course, just half listened to his roommate while stirring his coffee absently, wondering how this same phenomenon could possibly crop up in Florida backwaters, and Boston snowfall, and in his own Los Angeles suburb. At this point, things were getting weirder, but he just kept telling himself there had to be some sort of normal explanation, but he was beginning to feel doubtful. And so New Year's Eve comes, and this is when Theo began to skim a couple of local news segments about this strange lingering haze. Now, the fact that they addressed it was interesting, but most of the anchors just brushed it off as unusually persistent fog. though a short online piece highlighted people complaining of headaches and runny noses all across the state of California. In fact, there was a scientist interviewed on air who gave a measured statement about possible temperature inversions trapping pollutants, and that the possibility that this could all be advection fog, which is common in the US during winter, is very real. There was just something about the way everything's being handled. Nobody wanted to admit there might be something else at work. It's evident that this strange fog wasn't just showing up in Los Angeles anymore. It was appearing all over the world. Over in Manchester, England, this thick fog wouldn't go away. It hung around for more than 4 days straight, which is very unusual.
Why, in Manchester, we've had nothing but fog for 4 days now. 4 days in a row. But I haven't been able to see past these buildings here, barely seeing this main road, since the 23rd of December. It's now the 27th. And I know what fog is, and I've seen fog before, but I don't think ever in my life I have seen fog like this, like a blanket covering for 4 days in a row.
And everyone noticed the same thing, that this fog was really strange. It wasn't dissipating the way normal fog does, and it had this strange chemical-like quality to it. Going back to the United States, people in Tampa Bay reported the exact same characteristics. And over in the UK, the same thing. And in Germany and Australia and across Europe, they were all experiencing the same thing. Well, on New Year's Eve, a man named Clark Payne in Boston decided to do something very interesting. He collected some snow that had fallen during one of these fog events, and he examined it under a microscope. And what he found was very weird. There was this strange purple substance in the snow that he'd never seen before, and when it melted, it didn't leave behind normal water residue. It was like this wasn't even real snow. Now, by January 1st of this year, people were starting to get really scared because now they were getting sick.
Last night, I had a terrible stomach ache.
And some people who have been exposed to the fog are falling ill with the same illness of inflamed sinuses, can't sleep, loss of appetite.
I am saying this falls in line. Fucking conspiracy theorist, but I am. And so this falls in line. What is this? This is not fog.
They were coming down with these weird symptoms: sore throats, extreme tiredness, total loss of appetite. Some were getting these really bad flu-like symptoms, and others could not sleep at all. Now, on that morning, Theo woke up later than planned, and his eyes were gritty from poor sleep. And despite the holiday, there were now more reports than ever of the same low-hanging haze drifting through parts of Central California. Now, all over X and Facebook, people were now complaining of persistent sore throats, body aches, sudden exhaustion, as if things couldn't be getting scarier. Fortunately, he hadn't begun feeling these things yet. And so later in the afternoon, he decided to stand out on his front porch to see if he could notice more of these things himself. Maybe he wasn't crazy, and within only moments of being outside, he thought he could taste something in the air. Unfortunately, there really wasn't much in the way of news that was covering any of this. The following day, January 2nd of 2025, more videos and theories about all of this were surfacing.
Texas on the 30th, which was yesterday, a woman posted that she found this in her pool. They had just come off of a deep fog, and then this showed up. So she's thinking and feeling that this is correlated to that fog, which is really unusual because fog should definitely not put something like this in the water.
There's something to this fog because I've seen other TikTokulans saying that this happened in Russia when they were carrying out a military thing.
And I've woke up today with a sore throat. It's obviously that we're breathing in, because I don't feel like this is a normal fog. This is some type of chemical fog.
Now, this is just a theory, but there seemed to be one disturbing conclusion that many were coming to. Whatever was in this fog that was making people sick was most likely Serratia marcescens, which is a bacteria commonly associated with endocarditis, meningitis, and respiratory infections, among other things. But it gets worse. It's theorized that sulfur dioxide is in this fog, which explains the smell. Now, when sulfur dioxide is paired with this bacteria, it essentially functions as a way to modulate and control the virulence of it. Yes, that's exactly how it sounds. Now, before you scoff and roll your eyes, it turns out that the Navy performed a secret operation years ago in 1950 doing just this. In September of 1950, the US Navy wanted to experiment with what they thought at the time to be mostly harmless bacteria to test how vulnerable a city like San Francisco would be to a bioweapon attack. And folks, Operation Sea Spray was born. Now, for about a week, the US Navy sprayed massive amounts of 2 different kinds of bacteria 2 miles off the coast of San Francisco. And in the coming weeks, multiple Bay Area residents had to be hospitalized. And at the time, nobody could figure out what the cause was. And it was estimated that everyone had inhaled thousands of bacterial spores. All in all, there were 11 people who had contracted a very rare but deadly urinary tract infection that doctors would ultimately determine were caused by the experiment. Only 1 death was recorded.
In the following days, the military took samples and found that not only did it infect San Francisco, but also many of the surrounding areas. And when this happened, not a single person was made aware.
Now, it's hard to say for sure if we're dealing with something similar, but what's so weird is what many people have noticed it's doing to the things and animals around them. Things that normal fog wouldn't do. One witness in Germany had told local news that when this fog rolled in, all the birds in his neighborhood just went silent. His dogs, who were normally very calm, just began going crazy, barking and running in circles like something wasn't right. And speaking of animals acting strange, over in Western Australia, this farmer noticed that none of his livestock would go anywhere near the areas where this fog had settled. It was like they could sense something in that fog that humans just couldn't detect. And this wasn't just an isolated case. Other farmers in the area reported the same thing. Some of the people who got sick from this fog began developing these really unusual symptoms that doctors just couldn't explain. And I swear this thing is like right out of the X-Files. There was a woman from Tampa Bay who, after being exposed to the fog, started having these vivid nightmares every single night about the same thing. This strange purple light that seemed to be watching her. And other people who'd never met this woman or heard her story, who lived thousands of miles away, who were also exposed to the fog, reported the exact same dream. Stranger still is people finding their cars covered in this weird, almost metallic-looking substance. No matter what they did, they couldn't wash it off. Some even pursued professional cleaning services, but nothing worked. The substance would just stay there for days and suddenly disappear on its own. This truly begs the question that if we're just experiencing, a normal winter flu season and we're dealing with fog that happens commonly in the winter, then why are there all these strange and truly bizarre circumstances surrounding it? It just doesn't make any sense. This is still an ongoing issue, and even as today, January 15th, government officials maintain that this is just some unusual weather phenomenon, nothing to see here, folks. But everyone who's lived through it so far, who's gotten sick from it, the people who have seen what it's done to their communities, they're convinced that this is something else entirely, something that nobody wants to talk about. It's only getting worse from here. Honestly, none of us know what it is. All we know is that it's very, very strange, and it all remains completely unexplained. On December 20th, 2024, Malaysia announced they were going to resume searching for Flight 370, nearly 10 years after it had mysteriously vanished. Now, this announcement was kind of a big deal. I mean, this was one of the biggest aviation mysteries in all of history. So, of course, it makes sense they'd want to keep looking for it. Strangely, right around the same time Malaysia made this announcement, these bizarre drones and alien-looking orbs started appearing all over the world. Initially, there was no connection between the events, but there was an individual on X who had apparently dedicated years of his life to investigating Flight 370, pointed out something strange, something that made a lot of people stop and think. According to his research, there actually might be a direct connection between the orbs we're seeing and what actually happened to Flight 370. Now, there were about 20 scientists on that plane, and apparently they were on the verge of some major technological breakthrough, the kind of breakthrough that could change everything we know about our world. Now, to fully grasp how deep this really goes, we need to look at exactly what happened when this Flight 370 had vanished. And so on March 8th, 2014, Malaysian Airlines Flight 370 took off from Kuala Lumpur at midnight. Of course, it was supposed to be a typical 6-hour flight to Beijing, Now on board you had 2 pilots, 10 flight attendants, and 227 passengers. Now for the first 38 minutes, everything was normal. The plane was traveling up the Gulf of Thailand, following its planned route. At 1 a.m., Malaysian air traffic control told the pilots to switch over to Thailand's radio transmission since they were entering Thai airspace. The pilots agreed, wished Malaysian control goodnight, and that should have been it. But this is when things go from normal to strange. Instead of continuing on their planned route, the plane suddenly took this really odd right turn, followed by an extremely sharp left turn. And before they ever made contact with Thailand's air traffic control, the plane had basically vanished. It wasn't showing up on either country's radar anymore. Even weirder is that the plane began heading southeast, back over Malaysia without being detected by either country's air traffic control. And at 1:19 in the morning, the pilots made their final radio transmission. 3 minutes later, at 1:21 in the morning, the plane's transponder was turned off. The fact that someone deliberately turned it off is kind of a big deal. At 1:25 a.m., military radar picked up the plane one last time. Whoever was flying the plane at this point clearly knew what they were doing. The path they took was so precise, investigators said it had to be a highly skilled pilot. And then you folks know what happened. The day after the plane vanished, things began to get even stranger. Family members started calling their loved ones' phones, and the phones were ringing. And not just for a few hours, but all the way up to 8 months later. Now, how is a phone still working 8 months after a plane crash? Unless someone was charging it, the battery should be dead. Now, another weird part of this is the press conference that took place days after the plane's disappearance. Officials were talking about these blobs they saw on the radar, unidentified objects that were apparently surrounding the plane.
The several intermittent brown report. There's a last plot that had flown this. I'm not saying this is MH370, okay? We are still working with the experts.
So what do you see on
It's a plot. It's a plot. Unidentified plot.
And this is where things start connecting to what we're seeing now in 2025. A video that surfaced in May of 2014 makes everything all the more strange. A user by the name of Regicide posted footage that supposedly shows Flight 370's final moments. And what you can see is strange. You can see these strange orbs or these lights swarming around the plane. And if you look closer, you can see a mouse cursor and some letters at the bottom of the screen, which suggests somebody was recording their computer monitor. And then, folks, right before our very eyes, the plane vanishes. Gone. Nothing. And now there's also this other video that supposedly was taken by a drone. And in this one, you can see what looks like a thermal image of the plane. And you could even see the airplane's trail, and it kind of looks like it's on fire. And you can also see these trails from these orbs that are surrounding it. And now, fast forward to now, all of these videos of mysterious drones and orbs popping up all over the world, it kind of just makes you wonder. Even more so considering they look exactly like what we saw in those Flight 370 videos from 2014. Now keep in mind, there's not just a handful of sightings. I mean, there are sightings everywhere, moving in weird formations, circles at the top, formations on the right and left, and probably one of the strangest is that they're happening near nuclear reactors. And this really begs the question that, what if it isn't just about a missing plane? What if this is all about something much bigger, a deeper conspiracy? Here's, I guess, the twist.
From technology we were given, and it runs, and the equipment that's there is run on free energy.
No one has been able to control it. When it happens for a short period of time, and it's almost always destructive. It's a coupling of the device with the energy that permeates space.
Those scientists on the plane were supposedly working on something called zero-point energy. It's essentially this theoretical form of energy that could completely change everything we know about power and technology. And as a matter of fact, there's a video of a guy named Ashton Forbes talking about these orbs we're seeing now, and he believes they're actually plasmoids, which are these autonomous balls of plasma, which means that if we possess this kind of technology, where exactly did we get it from? And there's also others that believe the drones we're seeing aren't actually plasmoids, they're chasing them.
I think they're autonomous balls of plasma. And if we have that technology, There's a lot of tough questions that are going to be asked.
Interestingly, there have been posts popping up on social media like Instagram and TikTok about finding the remnants of Flight 70. You can't exactly just identify an airplane by its part number. You need a serial number. And from what they could gather from the supposed wreckage, they didn't have a serial number, which means that debris could have come from any 777, not necessarily Flight 370. Now, as more and more people began looking closer at the videos of the orbs around Flight 370, the ones everyone thought were fake, they actually found evidence suggesting these were not fake, that these in fact just look like screen recordings from a very sophisticated military satellite system. Because if you look closely at the video, you can see that it's cropped. There's this tag in the corner that shows which satellite was recording this. This particular satellite was launched in 2006, and its orbit put it exactly where Flight 370 was last seen. Ashton Forbes even pointed out something interesting and noticed that in the video, the mouse cursor is moving at 24 frames per second, but the background is only at 6 frames per second, which basically translates to somebody was logged into a military database and recording their screen, which again means that the person who leaked this was probably some kind of military personnel. Again, we're just theorizing here. I mean, it makes sense because they carefully removed all the sensitive information, took out the HUD data, and leaked just enough to show what really happened. Well, anyway, about a week after these videos were leaked, a Lieutenant Commander Edward Zeeland was arrested, and his lawyer said on record that the investigation into him began on April 2nd, 2014. Folks, that is just weeks after the plane vanished. The lawyer argued that the classified information in question was already available on the internet. If that's not these videos, then what was it? So why did the plane divert from its path before these orbs showed up? Well, it turns out there was lithium-ion batteries on Flight 370, and this is completely prohibited because if they catch fire, it's like impossible to put out. I mean, we're talking about 221 kilos of lithium-ion batteries, not just a little pack of them. They were not supposed to be there. So the speculation is that at 9:19 local time, the pilot said goodnight to Malaysian Airlines Flight 370, and only 2 minutes later, there's a huge explosion from these batteries that a guy named Mike McKay actually saw from an oil rig 300 miles away. 9 different witnesses along the coast heard loud noises at the same time. The plane goes dark, but at 9:30, another pilot actually hears one of the MH370 pilot's voices. Now, at the same time, you had 8 fishermen see the plane flying unusually low, like it was trying to get to an altitude where there would be enough oxygen for the passengers. The Malaysian Minister of Defense later admitted they knew it was a civilian airliner, but for some reason claimed they couldn't identify it. The plane flies over Langkawi at 9:52, and we know this because the co-pilot's cell phone actually pinged a cell tower there. Now, either the plane couldn't land because of the fire, or they had already communicated some kind of rendezvous point. But the plane continues flying until about 10:40, and that's when a witness named Kate sees something incredibly strange. A glowing orange plane with dark smoke coming out of it. Now, this matches up perfectly with what would have happened if the crew was fighting a lithium battery fire with halon fire suppression devices. And this is exactly when the videos start, the ones with the orbs, which matches up with the fire, and the plane is descending, which lines up with the Chinese only reported communication claiming the plane was attempting an emergency landing and literally disintegrating. And we could see that the plane was flying low because there are cumulus clouds in the video which only form between 1,000 and 5,000 feet. So the real question is, where was the plane taken? So a lot of people started talking about Diego Garcia Island. When people began analyzing photos from the time period, they found something strange. The metadata from certain images showed they were taken on March 18th on Diego Garcia Island. Remember those phone calls that were still going through to passengers' phones months later? Well, Ashton and other researchers tracked the cell signals, and guess what? There are only 2 places in that entire region where you can make a phone call: the Maldives and Diego Garcia. Also interesting is that Alex Collier, a pilot, had actually talked about this island way before any of this happened. And he mentioned that they had anti-gravity anomalies and were using them to launch equipment into space without rockets. Apparently, he went on to talk about how they were testing UFO-type craft built from technology that we were given.
Diego Garcia Island, there's a base there, Pine Gap. Diego Garcia Island, there's anti-gravity anomalies there, and this is how they were able to blow a lot of equipment into space without using rockets, and then they would have the UFO type craft, which we built from technology we were given.
So when you put everything together, it starts to make more sense. A whistleblower who contacted Ashton said something really strange as well, that we've had this technology since the 60s, and from day one, we've used it to make sure nobody else can get it. The big breakthrough apparently came in the early 2000s with quantum computers, which led to new AI technology. Maybe what happened to Flight 370 wasn't just a disappearance or an accident. Maybe it was about keeping this technology, whatever it is, out of the wrong hands. And perhaps these orbs we're seeing now are a sign that something big is about to change. But unfortunately, because nothing is official, this is all just wild speculation, and for now, it will remain a mystery. And because you guys made it this far, I want you to all comment below the fog, so that way I know who made it to the end and who didn't. If you guys enjoy cinematic storytelling like this, where we dive into strange cases of the mysterious and supernatural, what are you waiting for? Smack that like and subscribe button for more content just like this. As always, I love you all, keep an open mind, and I'll see you all in the very next episode.